Story recapped here. Today, I'm going to explain an action, mystery, sci-fi film called Sphere. Spoilers ahead. Watch out and take care. When the US Navy discovers an unidentified vessel under the Pacific Ocean, they assemble a team of experts to investigate the craft. A psychologist named Dr. Norman Goodman arrives on a ship in the middle of the ocean, thinking he'll be treating plane crash survivors, but he's puzzled when he sees a few familiar faces. As Navy personnel takes him to his quarters, he comes across Dr. Ted Fielding, a physicist, and Dr. Beth Halprin, a marine biologist. After waiting for 3 hours, US Navy Captain Harold Barnes knocks on his doors to take him to the briefing room. Along the way, Barnes tells Norman that they have found a spacecraft. Barnes hints that Norman was contacted because of a report he wrote on unidentified life forms, noting that the document has become their Bible. Inside the briefing room, Barnes informs the team that the spacecraft was buried under 8 yards of coral. Beth estimates from the coral growth that the ship has been under the ocean for about 300 years. Dr. Harry Adams, a mathematician, deduces that the vessel crashed in 1709. The Navy believes that there could be a life form inside the ship, so they contacted the group because they were mentioned in Norman's report about the effects of an alien invasion. Beth will assess the physiology of the ULF, while Harry would attempt communication with the aliens via mathematics. Fielding will try to determine the aliens' location in outer space, while Norman will help them deal with stressful situations when they come across the ULF. Barnes notifies them that the Navy's sonar has detected a low-level hum, indicating that something is running inside the craft. Harry has some apprehensions about going to the spacecraft, but Ted tells him that it will be the most significant discovery since Copernicus. Before going underwater, Norman apologizes to Harry for putting his name in the report. Norman discloses that he just picked the names of people he knew when he wrote it. He confesses that his report was bogus, but he couldn't tell Barnes because he will be indicted for fraud. Harry agrees to keep his secret. Soon, a submarine takes them to the Habitat, a structure assembled by the Navy to serve as a base while they investigate the spacecraft. When they get near the bottom, Ted is astonished by the size of the spacecraft. Outside the Habitat, a Navy dive team is preparing a robot to open the doors to the spaceship. The team leaves the Habitat and walks toward the spaceship. When they get to the airlock, they couldn't get it open, so Ted uses a hammer and a chisel to pry it open. Harry notices the chip on the door after Ted forces it open. He's baffled that the craft, made of a strong titanium alloy, wasn't damaged by the crash, yet it chips when Ted strikes it with simple tools. Beth notices heat emanating from the door, so Barnes prompts them to get back. The team is surprised when the door opens by itself. When they get in, Barnes tells them to keep their helmets on. Soon, Beth notices some footprints on the floor and concludes that someone has been there. The team splits up into 2 squads to explore more of the craft. After separating from the rest of the team, Norman confesses to Beth that he made up the report and borrowed some of the concepts from writers like Rod Serling and Isaac Asimov. When they step onto a platform, it takes them to another floor. Beth screams in shock when she comes across a corpse sitting on a chair. She concludes that it is human, and it died from blunt force trauma. They see him holding a snack called Smokehouse Almonds, so they assume they must be inside an American spaceship. When Beth starts tinkering with a console, she discovers that the records are in English. On the flight logs, they notice an item marked Unknown Entry Event. When they press it, a hologram appears, showing a spaceship entering a black hole. When Norman reports what they've discovered, Barnes tells them that they've found something even more mind-boggling. Barnes takes them to the cargo hold, where they find a massive sphere. Barnes suspects that the strange object could be a trap, so he tells them that he'll put a video camera on it. As they stare at it, Norman notices that the team is not showing up on the sphere's reflective surface. Back inside the Habitat, they discuss how an American spaceship with advanced technology ended up in the bottom of the ocean. Ted surmises that the spacecraft didn't crash, noting the lack of damage. He believes that it got caught into a black hole and arrived 300 years ago from another time. Barnes notifies them that there's a storm on the surface, so they have to go back up. Ted still wants to explore the spacecraft, but Barnes points out that they didn't find any ULF, so they are no longer needed. Inside their quarters, Harry predicts that they're probably going to die before they reach the surface. He thinks that the computer flight log recorded the ship's descent into the black hole as an unknown entry event because the team could not report their discovery to the Navy. As he goes to bed, he expresses his wish to get inside the sphere. Before the team could return to the surface, the alarm suddenly goes off. When Barnes looks at the video monitors, he sees Harry approaching the sphere. Norman tells Barnes about Harry's wish to go inside. While Harry stares at the shining ball, his reflection becomes visible on the surface. Barnes suddenly notices that Harry has disappeared, but it didn't seem like he entered the sphere. Barnes tells Norman that they won't return to the surface until they get Harry back from the spacecraft. Norman wears a diving suit and enters the spacecraft. As he stares at the sphere, he suddenly sees Harry appear on the ground. He tries to wake Harry up, but Harry doesn't respond even though his vital signs are normal. When Norman looks up at the object again, he sees his reflection emerge. The lights at the station suddenly go out and the video feed from the spacecraft gets cut. When it goes back up, Barnes realizes that they are running on internal power, which means that the submarine has turned back. He tells the team that they're going to be staying there for a while. Norman takes Harry back to the Habitat, still unconscious. As the crew waits to hear from the surface, Fletcher, a Navy personnel assigned to maintain the habitat, takes a video storage unit to the mini-sub to reset the timer. Barnes explains to Ted that they have to press the reset button every 12 hours to let the Navy know that they are still alive. If the timer doesn't reset, the mini-sub will automatically go up to the surface. After resetting the timer on the mini-sub, she notices numerous jellyfish swimming in the area. She starts to panic when the jellyfish starts to stick to her dive suit. Soon, she feels the jellyfish inside her body. Barnes tells her to keep moving, but the jellyfish swarm towards her. Soon the water gets inside her suit and she drowns. As Beth examines Fletcher, Norman tells her that he was once attacked by jellyfish when he was young. He says that he's been afraid of jellyfish since then. Beth soon realizes that the creatures that attacked Fletcher weren't like any jellyfish she's ever seen. Later on, Barnes calls Norman to ask whether Beth is mentally stable, noting that she once tried to take her own life. When Norman refuses to give away any information, Barnes castigates him for including her in his report while knowing about her mental history. Barnes fears that Beth will put the entire operation in jeopardy if she loses control of her mind, but Norman assures him that she's okay. As they continue to argue, Ted interrupts them to let them know Harry's awake. In the kitchen, Barnes asks if Harry can remember what happened inside the sphere. Harry confirms that he went inside, despite the lack of an opening on the object. Harry compliments Norman for his cooking, so Norman hands him a plate of calamari. But as soon as he learns what it is, he starts gasping for air. Ted performs the Heimlich maneuver on him, but he says that he's not choking. He tells them that he just doesn't like squid. Later, Barnes asks Ted to go to the control room because there's something wrong with the computers. While Barnes tries to figure out the problem, Harry arrives in the room and points out that there's a pattern in the numbers showing on the screen. Harry tells Ted to check if it's binary and suggests decrypting the numbers with the configuration of the keyboard. After deciphering the message, they learn that it comes from a sender named Jerry. Barnes doubts that it came from an alien because the message seems to be infantile. Harry points out that it's a perfect message because it's concise and non-threatening. When Jerry tells them that he's happy, Norman starts to worry because he has no idea what the entity will do when he gets mad. When Norman starts hearing thumping outside the ship, he asks Edmonds, another personnel on Habitat, if she knows what it is. After getting no response from Edmonds, he reports the strange noise to Barnes. Barnes tells him that Edmonds appears to be outside the habitat. When Beth and Norman look for her, they see her body on the side of the station and discover that it was her foot banging on the habitat wall. When Beth takes a closer look, she's startled by the condition of her body. She tells Norman that Edmonds' body has been pulverized. Meanwhile, Harry is in his room reading 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Verne. As Norman and Beth bring Edmonds' body back inside the station, eggs start to fall to the ground. Barnes suddenly notices something moving on the sonar, so he tells Norman and Beth to hurry because the object is moving closer. When Beth and Norman reach the station, the object suddenly disappears from the sonar. Norman wants to talk to Jerry about the horrific incident outside, but Barnes tells him that they need a game plan. When they get inside the control room, Jerry asks Norman what a game plan is. Norman realizes that Jerry can hear what they're saying even when they're not in the control room. When Jerry stops responding, the unknown object appears in the sonar again. They notice that more eggs are falling outside the habitat. When Beth asks if they have any defenses to protect the sensor grid, Barnes notes that they have a high voltage current on the skin of the habitat. However, a fire breaks out every time they turn it on. The creature, which appears to be a giant squid, starts banging against the habitat repeatedly. Harry remains asleep in his quarter despite the noise. When Barnes realizes that the pressure is dropping inside the habitat, he instructs Ted to go to the control room to set it back to normal. As Ted turns the valve, a jolt of electricity slams him to the wall, knocking him unconscious. Norman goes to the room and turns the valve, but the creature keeps attacking. Barnes realizes that the creature won't let go, so he instructs Norman to activate the high voltage current. After pulling the lever, the banging stops, but a fire soon breaks out in the communications room. As they scramble to extinguish the fire, the emergency doors get activated. Ted helps the team put out the flames as soon as he becomes conscious. Barnes jams a door with a box to prevent it from locking him in a hallway. But when he tries to get out, the box slips and the door crushes him. As Ted extinguishes the fire in the kitchen, a part of the ceiling falls on his head and debris pins him to the floor. He tells Norman to get out as the fire starts to build up below him. Ted then succumbs to the flames, and the fire extinguishes itself. Norman tries to contact Jerry again to ask him who put the fire out. Jerry asks him if he liked the giant squid and tells him that he can manifest more. Norman explains that the manifestations are killing people. He warns the entity that he'll end up alone again if people on the ship continue to die. The entity tells Norman to stop calling him Jerry. Norman goes to his quarters and finds Harry reading Verne's book. When Norman asks Harry if he knew about the attack, he says he slept through it because he was tired. Harry tells Norman that he loves the Jules Verne book, but he can't get past page 87 because it is too scary. Norman notices that Harry is oddly calm despite the catastrophic events within the habitat. He informs Harry that Barnes and Ted are dead, adding that most of their reserve gas is gone. Beth reminds them that they need to reset the mini-sub. Norman volunteers to go and tells Beth that he doesn't want Harry anywhere near the mini-sub because he suspects that Harry is somehow responsible for the incidents. Beth tells Norman that he'll watch over Harry from the control room. Norman resets the mini-sub and heads back to the habitat. But on the way, he notices bubbles coming out of his suit. He calls Beth for help, saying he can't breathe, but she's not in the control room. Harry guides him and tells him he has a faulty valve, but he'll still be able to breathe. Norman eventually reaches the ladder leading to the habitat, but a snake-like creature attacks him. Before long, the creature leaves him, allowing him to get back inside. Moments later, they notice Beth going inside the spacecraft, so they ask her what she's doing. She tells them that she went out looking for food because they ran out. Harry tells Norman that there's plenty of food in the kitchen. Norman gets angry with Beth, scolding her for not keeping watch on him as he was resetting the mini-sub. He then points out that they still have enough food. When she finds that the fridge and the cupboard are filled with food, she tells them that she didn't see them earlier. As Norman continues to castigate Beth, she asks Norman if Harry told him what happened inside the sphere. When Norman asks Beth if she went inside the sphere, she leaves the room without answering the question. Norman picks up the Jules Verne book from the ground but notices that Harry is still reading his copy. He then finds more copies of the book in the cupboards. Norman goes to the control room to ask Jerry what's inside the sphere. The entity tells him to stop calling him Jerry. Later, Norman tries to decipher the code and realizes that Harry made an error in decoding the numbers. Meanwhile, Beth goes outside of the habitat and switches on an explosive device. When Norman finally decrypts the numbers, he learns that the entity's name is Harry, not Jerry. Norman tells Beth that Jerry is Harry, and that Harry seems to be manifesting the strange creatures around them. Norman asks her to read page 87 of the Jules Verne book, which talks about a monster with 27 feet long tentacles. Norman points out that Harry hates squid, and he got scared when he read the passage from the book. Norman believes that Harry's imaginations manifest in the real world because he went into the sphere. Norman suggests putting Harry in a deep unconscious sleep to keep him from manifesting any more creatures. He and Beth go through the ship's medical supplies to find a drug that would knock Harry unconscious. While Harry is lying in bed, Norman holds him down while Beth injects him with a sedative. Harry goes to sleep right away. They soon receive a transmission from the surface, telling them that the weather conditions have returned to normal and they can return to the surface within 6 hours. As Norman brushes his teeth on his flooded bathroom, a snake suddenly slithers inside his pants. Beth arrives as he screams in fear. Beth then grabs the reptile and tells him that it was a belcher snake. She says that it's the most poisonous snake in the world, but they're only dangerous at night. Beth soon tells Norman to meet her at the lab, but when he gets there, she locks him in. She instructs him to inject himself with the sedative because he's been manifesting the snakes. Beth also points out that the jellyfish came out of Norman's mind because it was one of his childhood fears. Beth further reminds him that he's the only one who could be manifesting the creatures because Harry is in a dreamless sleep. As Norman continually refuses her demand, Beth takes the gas off the room. As the lab floods with water, Norman grabs a canister of oxygen on the floor. Norman manages to open a hatch and swim out of the habitat. As Beth watches him on the monitors, she sees a video of Barnes asking her what qualifies her for their secret operation. She also sees footage of Norman berating her for almost getting him killed when he went to the mini-sub. Beth gets anxious and runs out of the control room. When Norman gets back inside, he hears Beth crying inside a hatch, so he goes down and talks to her. Norman deduces that Beth also went into the sphere. Harry sees them and asks them why they knocked him out. Norman tells him that they all went into the sphere, and everything they're thinking is manifesting into reality. Norman speculates that the astronauts also did the same. He thinks the spaceship crew went in one by one and became so paranoid that they killed each other. They soon hear an announcement saying that the explosives outside the habitat have been activated, and they only have 13 minutes to evacuate. Beth explains that the explosives were supposed to be used to blow up the corals, but she used them as a defense perimeter around the ship. She thinks that something from the sphere has triggered it, but she soon realizes that her mind probably activated it because she was thinking of wanting to die. Harry tells her that the explosive will disintegrate everything because of the liquid hydrogen in the spacecraft. Norman prompts them to run to the mini-sub, but when they get inside the vehicle, they couldn't turn it on. They find themselves instantly transported inside the spacecraft. They try to find their way out, but they appear to be running in circles. Realizing that they might not get out, Harry tells them to leave him behind. When they end up in front of the sphere, Norman's reflection instructs him to push the button. Norman tells them to let go of their thoughts. When they end up in the mini-sub again, Norman pushes the button. The mini-sub soon becomes operational and starts moving towards the surface. Harry fears that they're moving too slow, and they'll be sucked back down when the bomb explodes. As the mini-sub reaches the surface, explosion destroys the habitat. After going through the decompression process, they discuss what they will tell the Navy. Harry points out that no one would believe them if they admit the truth. Harry surmises that the sphere is destroyed, but Beth points out that they still have the power. Beth worries that she might manifest weird things in her sleep, and she fears that their power would end up in the wrong hands. Norman tells her that they are the wrong hands, noting that they've been manifesting destructive thoughts. Harry hints that they could use their power to forget what they discovered. Norman wonders if they want to forget, knowing that they came across the most significant discovery in history. Norman asserts that it's hard to let go of the power when they know it can make their dreams come true. Harry tells them they're not ready for that kind of power. Harry points out that the Navy personnel will soon enter the room to interrogate them, so they join hands and think about forgetting about their power. As they concentrate, the sphere rises from the bottom of the ocean and flies into the sky. When they open their eyes, Norman and Harry are puzzled about holding each other's hands. Subscribe to watch more videos like this. Turn on notifications. And leave a like, it really helps the channel out. Thank you for watching.